We have two unresolved matters with deponent verbs. And that is, yes, one of them is deponent participles. Deponent verbs have three types of participles, as you would anticipate, because they are still, verbs. So the first one that we're going to begin talking about is the present participle, which is still, in deponent land, a present active participle. Think back to when we first learned about present participles. How do you make a present participle? How did we make them in December when you first learned about them? Will? Right. What do you put the NS on? Right, which is also the infinitive. We took off the RE, as you said, and then we added NS, NTIS. Here's the problem, though, you see. With a deponent verb, we don't have an infinitive that ends with RE. What do we have, though? An RI, yeah. I think you were saying it versus like spelling it. Okay, yeah. So the rule is essentially the same. You're going to take the infinitive. You're going to take off RI, and then you're going to add your NS. The translation is still what? What does a present participle look like in English? Yeah. Walking, right. Do you have your notebook? Okay, now would be a good time to take it out. The process of the infinitive minus RE is great about 75% of the time. In which scenario of deponent verbs does this not work? Exactly. In third conjugation, you only have an I. So what do you think we should do for third conjugation? Yeah? We do need an E. But our third conjugation infinitive doesn't end with one. So what do we have to do? Think about what your third conjugation deponent infinitive looks like. That's the third principal part. You can go back to your notes from the other day, because in your notes the other day we talked about what the infinitives look like. Yeah. Exactly, right. So you're still going to start with the infinitive, but instead of taking off the RI, you're going to take off just the I, since that's the only thing that you have. But then, as Ian was saying, because we're dealing with a third conjugation form, we have to put an E before our NS, NTIS. And that's not unsimilar, or dissimilar rather, to say caro, carere, right? Its present participle was carens, carentis. Just a quick note of clarification that in the realm of third IO and fourth, since they are so dependent on that I, right? That's why we call it third IO and not third like RO. When it's third IO and fourth, you actually need an IE before your NS, NTIS. Audientis was our present participle for listening. And then progrediens, progredientis would be our third IO deponent form. Same idea. All right. We're just going to look quickly. We're going to keep a sample of a deponent verb here just for reference. So our present active participle started from the infinitive. The next type of participle we have to discuss are perfect. In deponent land, we'll actually get translation, but we'll get to that in a second. How did we form perfect participles way back when? These are the easiest of the batch. Yeah?
Wasn't like US
No? Yep. It was the fourth principal part, straight up. We didn't do anything to change it. It was just the fourth principal part. Here's the problem with deponents. 1, 2, 3. There's no fourth principal part. So what do you recommend that we do?
third principal part.
And do what with it? Okay, you're on the right track, Ian?
Make it passive.
Well, it already is passive. Everything deponent is passive. So Luke has a good idea to start with the third principal part. What should we do? No ideas?
Yeah, US.
But it already has one. Somewhere. What's that?
The third principal part. Yeah, the US.
But in the third principal part, this word already has a TUS. Well, yeah, exactly. Just excise the sum, and you're good to go. You take what you need from the third principal part. Because what you need from the third principal part is identical to what you would have wanted from a fourth principal part, right? Yeah? Okay. So a perfect passive participle is the first half, or you can understand it as the first word of the third principal part. In other words, no sum. If you have sum, not a perfect passive participle. And then what is the translation of a perfect passive participle for a deponent verb? Having blanked, right. We do have been in there because been is kind of the hallmark, if you will, of passive voice. All right. Our third type of participle are future active participles. Okay, so this is one of those very few times that deponents do kind of have active forms in their own weird way. What did the future participle look like? How did we get there from regular verbs? Do you remember? Right. So we took that fourth principal part, we added UR before the US, and then that was it. That's all we had to do. Now that we're in deponent realm and we don't have that fourth principal part, what do you think we should do? What kind of adaptation do we have to make? To what? Right. So you're going to do the same process where you're using the first half / the first word of the third principal part. No sum. To that, you add UR before your US. Our future active participle translation stays the same. How do you translate a future active participle? That would be a future perfect verb. No? Yep, good. I think it's fairly logical. You just have to sort of adapt what you know to what's available to you. Okay, so let's take your participle knowledge and use that to inform your infinitive knowledge. The good news for all of you is that deponent verbs only have 3 tenses of infinitives, or three actual infinitives. And coming off of your infinitive and indirect statement tests, you know that regular verbs have 5 forms. So with deponents, saving time and energy. So deponent infinitives are next on our list. Okay, so we have a present passive infinitive. What does that look like? The easiest of them all. What's A-word?
Oh, no, it's M-R-I.
You're on the right track. What's that? Yeah, so how do you know what the infinitive is in the verb? There you go. Done. Whatever the second principal part is your present passive infinitive. And then how do you translate it? Knowing that it's a deponent verb, so it's going to have a passive form, but an active translation to blank. Okay, you're fresh off your indirect statement and infinitives tests, so this should be relatively easy for you to answer. How do you create a perfect passive participle? Infinitive, excuse me. That's perfect active. You all did really well on your infinitive tests. I should have like 15 hands up, except they're not here, so 14. Yeah.
You take the third principal part, take off the sum, and then that's it.
Good, 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 good. In regular verb land, we took the fourth principal part and paired it with essay. But Angela's appropriate suggestion is to take what we need from the third principal part and then add essay. So your perfect passive infinitive is the first word or the first half, depending on how you're imagining it, of the third principal part. No sum. Kick it out. You don't need it. With essay. And then how do you translate a perfect passive infinitive? Or perfect active infinitive because it's deponent. That would be a participle translation. Yeah. Well, all infinitive translations start with that, right? It's baffling to me that like 2 weeks ago, almost all of you got like a B or an A on this test. 2 weeks. Gone. So weird. All right. To have blanked, yes. Whoops. Okay. And our third tense of infinitive are future active infinitives. Whoops. How do you create, or do you remember how to create a future active infinitive from old verbs? Yeah? And then have? Right. Right. So essentially we said create a future active participle and then add essay, right? So you're going to do the same thing here because deponent verbs are still verbs. So you're going to take the first half of the third principal part. No sum. You're going to add UR before the US. And you're going to pair that whole thing with essay. How would you translate a future active infinitive? It's got to start with this little word. Luke? Good. To be about. Oops. verbs to blank. Good. So what I would like for you to do right now is to go back to your documents that you did the master conjugation of all 5 verbs. And I'm going to give each group one verb for which you're going to provide 3 infinitives and 3 participles, Latin and English. Progredior, sequor, moror, vereor, experior.